This is Canon Fodder, episode 53, live from Iraq. Joining me this week is author and Twitter poster Jay Stancliff. John, how we doing?
Doing great. It's pretty hot here.
Now, I wanted to maybe talk about Fedbook really quickly, just because it's probably one of the best books that I've read out of this sphere. I still contend that Marty Phillips is the gold standard in terms of our guys. But I rank you above myself in terms of talent, ability, and uh, just the way that you put a sentence together. So I wanted to give you some flowers and also go over Fedbook a little bit.
Yeah, wow, thank you so much. That means the world to hear. And yeah, I agree. Marty's pretty amazing. Um, Definitely an author I respect and look up to.
So why don't you tell everybody about Fedbook, and then we can move on to redeployment.
Yeah, so Fedbook is about a privately contracted informant who works for a company that basically takes contracts from the federal government to place operatives among the various extremist groups that exist in the United States, and hopefully far away future or future that will never exist. But it's definitely a post GWAT world, and there's clues about that. Main character references, not remembering 9/11 and such.
Mm.
But yeah, my idea was that there would be a time in America where there's so many different extremist organizations that the FBI and DHS can't commit the personnel to spy on all of them, so they hire companies to do it for them, which is probably already happening to
It
some
has to
level.
be.
Yeah,
I think about the way that our federal government is set up, and you think, well, what's a good grift? What's a good way to spread out some government pork? And advertising that, hey, we're stopping the far right or something like that is a good is a good way to get some government dollars. Uh,
yeah. There's an article I read. I don't know. It's probably like 2 years ago or something like that, which made me feel like I was sort of on the right track. But it said it's something about how there's like, you know, I think 20 to 50,000 people employed to varying degrees, testing out like signals intelligence stuff for various federal agencies. So I think the idea there was that they'd have some sort of transmitting equipment, and then this person would just have the gig to go and see if like just walk by it, and they would get paid based on whether or not they were able to uh, I don't know, pick up signals intelligence off of the transmitter or something. And there's a lot of that was one example they used in the article, but little piecemeal intelligence stuff like that all over the U.S. I'm not sure if there's informants like Soldier Crane working for private companies, but yeah, um, the central narrative bit there was that this obviously creates a conflict of interest problem whereby the companies that are taking these contracts have an incentive to maybe do a little bit of extremism.
well, it's a great read. I highly recommend it to everybody. And we'll circle back to Fedbook at the end. I've learned that you want to bookmark the shilling at the beginning and the end of the podcast.
Nice.
Some tricks of the trade that I've picked up in my many days of doing this. But we're here to talk about Redeployment by Phil Cly. Probably, oh, let's see, it was probably about 10 years ago, thereabouts, that I was introduced to this book. My writing mentor made an offhand comment about this National Book Award winning short story collection about the Iraq War. He was like, "Hey, Hudson, you were in the army, right? You'd probably really like this." And I looked it up, and then lo and behold, I really liked it. And I'm not the only person who did. as like I'm not the only person who did. It won the National Book Award for in 2014. It's gotten all sorts of accolades, and it's strange how popular the book is, but then also it just completely died.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the interesting ironies of the National Book Award is there's some titles on there that are instantly recognizable, and then there's I don't know, the majority are just kind of they sort of fade away.
Right, and this is also in that late Obama era where
Right.
everything was like, the term woke is pretty overused at this point, but this was at the beginning of the Great Awakening, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it won the award basically right when the Cultural Revolution was kicking off.
Like he's a straight white guy veteran who won the National Book Award. Not many of those in recent years.
Right.
And I think like Obama has his second book, Missionaries. It was like on his 2020 to read list or something. So it's strange that this book isn't very well or isn't read nearly enough, and hopefully we can do some work in getting the word out about this sort of hidden gem. But the people who have read it and loved it are not who you'd expect.
Yeah, exactly. Because you think about sort of what other media was coming out on the War on Terror at that time, and it was like American Sniper with Bradley Cooper. I'm pretty sure that came out the same year, and it
Mhm.
it really could not be more different. It's one of the shittiest movies I've ever seen.
Oh,
Shittiest war movies.
Lone Survivor?
Well,
Or
that one
no,
too. That
American Sniper, that's right, that's
American Sniper.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, something about, get a real baby,
Yeah.
Like, you don't need a plastic doll that you have to physically manipulate its hand to make it look like a real baby. Uh,
Yeah, that's I forgot about that. That's pretty funny. I guess the real baby got sick or something, and I don't know. Producers like, nope, I'm gonna lose $10,000 if you spend an extra day getting a real baby. So we're just gonna make it look like crap.
just go down to Toys R Us. Is that still around? Uh, yeah, no, and, couldn't have been made about a worse fella. Chris Kyle has gotten a lot of positive attention in our culture, and the more you look into the guy, there are a few, sort of podcasts that I've listened to and people who have recommended podcasts on Chris Kyle, and dude was a psycho. Dude wanted to be the American Sniper. Uh,
Yeah, he's a very controversial figure to say the least.
you know,
I think it's pretty interesting. I guess the difference between a book like Redeployment and I would say the sort of far more well known and more popular like Brovet uh
hmm hmm
GWAT verse in general, which American Sniper represents. They
right,
they
or
really could not be more different.
what's that one film, The Hurt Locker,
Right.
that tries to be like Redeployment, but at the same time it's trying to be both things. It's
Yeah,
trying to
exactly.
be Rambo in Iraq while also being a character study of like, well, what is the effect of these guys when they come home, and that's what Redeployment is mostly about. There are a few stories that talk about deployments themselves, especially at the beginning, the first few, but most of them are homecoming stories or stories about readjusting to some sort of normalcy. And I
Sure.
think the first story itself, Redeployment, is probably uh, the best example of this.
Yes. Yeah, I the part that I really liked about it, I mean, it's obviously the centerpiece is sort of the situation with the dogs. It seems
hmm
like, um, but like I don't. He does a good job of. I haven't personally experienced this, but the situation where he comes home and he sees his wife standing there and on the sidewalk, and then he comes back to his house, and there's just kind of this weird, they've sort of gotten used to not being around each other, so they don't
Mhm.
know, like, they sort of have to like play act their relationship before it can feel natural again. And then you've got his kind of dying dog standing as like a emblem of the time that he's spent away, like the whole
Right.
time.
Right.
It's pretty brutal, and it's a really good way to
Yeah, and
frame that
he does an
situation.
excellent job of the sort of, I think about that picture of was it VJ Day where the sailor is kissing the nurse,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? And everybody is trying to, at least in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Vietnam very different, obviously. But, you know, the e when the troops come home, right, every wife has their makeup done up, and they're trying to, really doll themselves up as much as possible so that their, soldier husband can come home and have that, VJ Day moment,
Mhm.
And I really, I hated the sign, but I liked how true to life it was. She's holding
Yeah,
like that, like, "Here's your chore list, number 1, do me," or it was a to-do
to
list,
to-do
1,
list.
me, 2, repeat 1,
Yeah, yeah. It's
like,
like
it's
it's
more for everybody else around than for him
or
or
even
for
her,
her.
really.
Right,
Yeah.
right, it's like this kind of performance only for them to come home, and yeah, they're just complete strangers. They haven't seen each other in 9 months.
Yeah, and it's also missing the element of, like, in World War II, the I mean, that's probably a stage photo, but let's say it's not. Um, I mean, they
I like
were
to believe it's not. You're probably right, but, like, some piece of me inside is like, "Man, that would be great if that was just a moment," you know?
yeah, yeah. Let's believe that. Let's believe it was just a perfect pure moment. I think, it's probably a lot more believable that you would have that moment if you were not a volunteer, like if you were drafted and
Mm,
you're, going to fight this military that like until the end of the war was doing almost 2-to-1 trading casualties with you. Be pretty relieving to have defeated them and then come back home to your sweetheart and everybody adoring you. Whereas coming back from Iraq, you probably volunteered for it, so to some level, you want to be in the shit.
right.
You want to be there, and I can't remember, frankly, if this character expresses that like desire, like he wanted to be there more than he wanted to be home. But um, it's definitely like you get this kind of work like impression from him. Um, like he almost doesn't feel like he had to, why did he have to go in the first place, and like why did he leave his wife like that? Why did he leave his dog like that? There's definitely an aspect where he's like ruminating on the, I guess, the selfishness of the whole thing.
Right, right. There, and that is an aspect that doesn't get discussed. It almost can't be discussed,
Hmm.
that there is a level of selfishness, and sort of hero wish fulfillment, right, of deploying overseas. The young men who are looking for their path to manhood, or their cleansing ritual, or something. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah, of
that
course.
that thing that makes them a man, or that thing that makes them more than they were. Uh,
Exactly.
there's
The desire
another
for adventure.
Yeah, there's another Marine, uh, Max something, who wrote a graphic novel. He did like a comic strip for the longest time about the military, called Terminal Lance, and
Hmm.
he wrote this graphic novel. And I remember this one part of it. He's in Iraq, and it's early Iraq, and he's talking to the interpreter, and he makes some offhand comment about this being like an adventure, and the interpreter's like, okay, this is your adventure, this is my home. I have to live here. I have to rebuild this place after you go home.
Mm-hmm.
Like if this were your home and I were here, and like you would hate me, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And he immediately, he doesn't have that innocence is taken away from him right away. The weight of invading a country for basically no reason kind of falls on his shoulders. And I think that Cly does an admirable job of capturing that as well.
Yeah, he does. That was something I was looking for just in the interpretation of uh, of Iraq. I was trying to see if there's some guys. I mean, that you like, and maybe this is more restricted. Maybe this is just posturing. It's probably just restricted to like Brovet podcasts. They're a valuable primary resource for a bunch of reasons. But if you listen to some of them, you get the impression almost that some of these guys like they really like war.
Mhm.
They like that's where I was at my best. It's fun to some level being in a firefight or something. I was interested to see if Phil Clay was gonna portray any of that. But yeah, it's definitely like
No, he doesn't address that at all, and that's why bringing up that he was a public affairs officer, I think,
right.
kind of comes into it. Because yes, he did deploy to Iraq. He was in country for a number of months. He did a deployment, right? He probably saw a lot of different things. Uh, but his experience, not only as like a rear echelon guy, right,
Mhm.
but also as an officer, is very different from the experience of, say, I'm blanking on the gentleman's name right now, but he wrote "Welcome to the Dirt Cult." Finley,
Oh yeah, Finlay. Yeah.
Sam Finley, right? Who was an enlisted soldier. I think his work. I think he wrote about Afghanistan. Yeah, he wrote about
Yes, he did.
Afghanistan, which is like the bastard child of the GWAT, and we can get into
Right.
that.
Which is
Uh,
funny because it was like the good one, the
right,
first
it's
one
like
that
the one that made sense, right?
right.
But Iraq was, of course, the sexy one
Right.
because for a whole host of reasons, right?
Yeah, it was a
Uh,
really interesting conflict. But yeah, I agree. Sam Finlay is a totally different. I mean, it's not totally different. All basically the difference is that Phil Cly is focusing uh mainly on like what the war ultimately does to a person's soul, it seems like.
mhm,
And Sam Finlay, he focuses on that as well, but it's so much about the nitty gritty of being in big army, as he calls it, that you pretty much get the full spectrum of
right.
human experience there. Like the stuff that ultimately sucks really bad, which sounds like it's sucking really bad for more often than not terrible shit tests and bureaucratic reasons than like actual combat. You
Right.
know, he basically makes he's honest about it being a source of genuine camaraderie and something that you can't get in the modern world, which I think was kind of his reasoning for writing it. That's what it
And
seemed like.
and with Finley or Finlay, and I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I'll go Finley, and you can say Finlay, and one of us will be right.
Right.
Uh, but with Finley, you do get that sort of I chose to be here. Maybe I regret my choice, or maybe I think that I was stupid for making that choice, but I chose to be here. I want to see what it's all about.
Hmm.
Where you don't get that level of reality from Clyde's work, and that's not to take away from Clyde, just to say that there is a difference. There
Right.
is the one story, bodies, with the goth chick, which I thought was really funny. Um, where he does, he talks about how he the character in that story talks about how he volunteered. His pacifist girlfriend, of course, uh, doesn't agree and actually breaks up with him because of that.
Oh, right. Okay, you said goth girl. I was like goth girl. I remember. Yeah, she's like
Well, she's just kind of pale and gangly, and then she
And
fills
she's
out
really
after he
shy
gets back.
and
Yeah, and she's not particularly good looking, but she's that quirky mid that
right,
every
right.
man deserves. Yeah, and
Yeah,
and
I
then
really
she
like
ends
that.
up
I thought that
filling
was
out.
I was sad that it didn't work out for them. I was like, this is a really
Yeah, me
beautiful
too. But
romance.
it's more honest that it didn't.
Sure,
It's more true to life. I had a
definitely.
friend when I was in the army who had a fiance. This We were in A school together, right? Which is like the job training,
Mm.
and he she was a big old gal, right? And she was his high school sweetheart, and she wanted to marry him, and they were waiting for marriage and all that, and she would like send him all of these really sexually charged messages, I think, to keep him interested, because like we were decently far apart from where he was from and where she lived, but I think to frustrate him and to keep him interested,
Right.
uh because it's better than like we could just go out in town and meet somebody, uh and actually I kind of regret this now, just because of who I've become. But I remember telling, I was like, dude, you got to break up with this girl. Like, you're a good looking dude. Like, she's uh you know she's a rather rotund woman. um it's and end up didn't it they ended up breaking up, and we quote unquote saved him. uh
Right.
I kind of regret that now, but like there are stories of couples making it, which is definitely the exception more than the rule. In the first story, Redeployment, you have one of the men, his wife just leaves.
Right. Yeah, he doesn't
He
have any of
comes
his stuff in his
home,
house.
she's not there, nobody's home. She's maxed out the credit card, she's taken all of his stuff. Uh, and that actually happened to one of my sergeants.
Yeah, doesn't their
That happens a lot.
yeah, one of their platoon leaders makes them each take time like spending time with the guy
Yep, yep.
over the
Yeah, they
course
they,
of
they
their
all
weeks.
just to make sure he doesn't kill himself,
Right.
which happens a lot too. And yeah, so he gets all of the details right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's experienced some of this firsthand. Uh
Oh yeah, I'm under the impression that as an officer, I don't know what rank he got to, but you're adjudicating. I mean, as a public relations officer, you probably have a bunch of enlisted men. Probably 50 enlisted men under you when you first start out as a mid-20s guy, and you're constantly having to babysit and put fires out and watch people destroy their lives over nothing. And even in public relations, to say nothing of like the infantry, where I'm sure it's probably much worse, especially in the Marines. But
yeah, no, you're not wrong there. Let's see. A few of the other stories you have, after action report, where, and this I think is like the third story in, but
hmm
you have a military police convoy. They keep getting hit by IEDs. They can't, or they're getting shot at by snipers. So they can't see the guys in front of them.
right,
And finally, they get ambushed, and one of the guys, Tim Head, which is an interesting name, he kills a guy. He kills somebody, and he's the first one to do it. He's the first one of their cadre to kill anybody on deployment, and he doesn't know how to feel about it. So actually, the main character, quote unquote, takes credit for that, and
right,
he's the hero of the platoon, right? He's the guy everybody's looking up to, or the officers are coming up to and say, hey, if you need to talk about this, my door's open and stuff. It's and that's all true to life too, because you have that dichotomy of officers and enlisted,
hmm
where the enlisted guys, they have to act like they're hard as fuck, you know they have to act like they're Superman.
right,
Whereas you have the officers, they get to show a little bit more humanity, But it's actually pretty perverse because they're also the ones that are signing the orders and telling the guys to go out and, do something potentially dangerous.
Yep.
So
I
different
don't.
levels of care.
I thought this is a story where the two guys like share not a bunk. They
I
share a
mean,
room
a
together,
room.
right?
Yeah, they're roommates. Yeah.
Yeah, they're. It was just so interesting how they're, they're so young. I mean, they're like sitting in bed before they have to like go out on patrol again. The next morning they're probably getting 4 hours of sleep or something. They're like playing Nintendo DS or something. I
Yeah,
could.
yeah, yeah. Well,
I
yeah. I just reread this one, and yeah, the one guy, the main character's playing Grand Theft Auto on the PSP,
right.
and Tim Head is playing Pokemon on his Nintendo DS.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's just awkward between them. He's like, "Look, man," and the other guy's like, "Just shut up about it. I don't want to talk about it."
right, right.
It was really interesting. I don't know. It just showed how young they are, and I mean, it also dates the story. It's kind of nostalgic to talk about
Yeah,
something
it's
like
like,
the PSP.
hey, who has a PSP anymore? Like, yeah. But it's the more things change, the more they kind of stay. I can imagine like the first Iraq War. You've got guys with like Game Boys.
Right.
Or, well, actually, when did the Game Boy come out? Probably maybe after. It doesn't matter, but you know what I'm saying. Like, there's just these. Yeah, as you said, these guys are kids. They're
Right.
playing with toys, and then
Yeah.
they're
Before they
going
go out.
out and killing people.
Yeah.
And the person that Tim had killed was
Was a kid.
himself a 16-year-old kid. There that he says 16. We don't actually know, uh, but yeah, it's
Right, and
just
it's crazy how he keeps up the act too with people coming like with that being the central element. The people, his officers coming up to him and being like, "Look, man, you had to do it. There's no other option." And he's like, yeah, well, I know."
and then he does it himself. Actually, he thinks he's killed somebody as well, and he is going through everything that he's pretended to go through up until that point.
Right. It's a very interesting story. I feel like it's almost experimental, maybe. I don't know, where you're kind of you're taking like a false experience and
There
adopting it
are
as your own.
several layers of dramatic irony going on.
Yeah, yeah, which is cool.
Yeah,
It's
no,
really
it's
neat. And I'm
it's a
sure
it's a
that.
really nuanced story, and the whole
Yeah.
collection is full of nuance. It's probably why it won all the awards that it did. Uh,
Yes, I don't think he. I mean, maybe I'm missing one, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't repeat like an MOS in any one of the stories. And there's stories from enlisted men. There's stories from the perspective of the enlisted men. There's stories from the perspective of officers. All sorts of stuff. There's a story. My favorite story in it was "Prayers in the Furnace." I think it's called, which is from the perspective of a chaplain.
right.
Which I guess kind of to wrap back around to something we were talking about earlier about like wanting to be there versus being drafted or whatever. A chaplain's kind of in a weird middle ground because I think he'd been a chaplain for a while and he just ends up in Iraq because that's what's going on. That wasn't necessarily drafted. He wanted to serve in the military in his priestly capacities, but it ends up in I think it's Ramadi in that story,
Mhm.
which was obviously that's one of the more high intensity fights of that conflict.
It might be the
Um,
longest story of the collection too.
yeah, and that one's really good. Great depiction of like people. People are sort of forced to behave a certain way, and then um, realizing that they don't know if they can moderate it, and that struggle of moderating the savage tendency with like a civilized tendency, causing so much internal tension and feeling like you can't relate to anybody else culminates in that sermon he gives, which is a really, I mean, it definitely, I don't feel like I've read maybe that many fictional sermons, but it's a great sermon that he gives about in front of those Marines about how they need to suck it up and realize they're not suffering alone and that everybody suffers and their job, they're called to suffer. And he quotes that Marine that served in World War One. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I'm pretty sure I'm bookmarked on that story, but he it's the There's an officer in World War One who he quotes. Yes, here it is. Well, maybe he was an officer. I don't know. Owen. The soldier's name was Wilfred Owen. He's commanding man in World War One. Owen writes, for 14 hours yesterday I was at work, teaching Christ to lift his cross by numbers and how to adjust his crown, and not to imagine he thirsts until after the last halt. I attended his supper to see that there were no complaints, and inspected his feet that they should be worthy of the nails. I see to it that he is dumb and stands at attention before his accusers. With a piece of silver I buy him every day, and with maps I make him familiar with the topography of Golgotha. And then, I looked up for my sermon and looked hard at the audience, which was looking hard back at me. We are part of a long tradition of suffering. We can let it isolate us if we want, but we must realize that isolation is a lie. I think he's talking to one of these younger guys that's in a unit. I suppose part of the main effort. It's just getting in firefights every day, and like all the command is like the command in that unit is like encouraging them, like they need to be getting in firefights. Oh yeah, to the point where they're like jumping up on the roof. Yeah, they're jumping up on the roof, exposing their genitals and like shouting obscenities.
Right.
So they
and you
start
have
getting shot at.
the one guy who joins Veterans Against the War, who says that he names like one of the captains by name and says if he would come up and personally congratulate a man if he got his first kill, and you'd get 96, which is 96 hours off, 96 hours of leave, if your first kill was stabbing a man to death.
Right. Yeah, so the unit is definitely encouraged to be getting in fights, being ultra violent, and obviously like young Marines probably to some extent, some units they probably want that to be the culture, and I suppose it's important for that to be the culture. It's just interesting from the perspective of the chaplain who's having to like minister to these guys who are getting progressively more mentally screwed up for it, especially when they like take pretty much a needless casualty in their own unit. Like the guy they're all friends with does this stupid trade on the roof and gets shot. So
and then hearing about the suicides on the way home, you really do get a full picture of the pointlessness of Iraq, and that's one thing. There are two layers of the pointlessness of Iraq. There's the let's call it the regime approved pointlessness, right?
mm-hmm.
It's the the Republican Party and the neocons, especially at that time, they lied us into this war, and they're bad, and the soldiers are good, and they're just like they are as much a victim of their government as the million Iraqis that we wiped off the face of the earth in that war, which isn't untrue, but it's also just like a half truth, right?
Yeah, I mean, like we did destabilize the country, but Shia and Sunni militias contributed a lot to that number as well.
Right. I'm not saying that like it's we just indiscriminately killed civilians. I'm sure that probably happened in isolated places, but yeah, it was a lot of sectarian violence that drove those numbers up, which is a tragedy, especially considering there was a healthy Christian population, Coptics, Orthodox, which I know you are, as am I, that were wiped out. There's almost no Christians left in that region.
Right. I think that, I mean, I don't want to speak for everyone, but a really a misunderstood part of that war is that it wasn't, the coalition moved in. We thought, it seems so stupid in hindsight. I guess maybe at the time it might have seemed like feasible, but we appointed a provisional government to get the country back on its feet, and it didn't work. What happened was like a freaking 50-sided civil war, which is crazy.
Well, okay. So we thought there are, let's say, 3-ish major schools of international relations these days. My friend the Prudentialist, who I think you've interacted with a little bit, friend of the
Actually,
show.
I actually have not.
Oh, he's a great guy.
Yeah,
I'll
he's Orthodox as well, right?
Yes, he is. Yes, I will make the introduction because he's a fantastic fella, and he's really smart dude. I don't know if he does much international relations work these days, but his stuff is top notch. I really you should go through his backlog. Everyone should. Um,
Definitely.
the the three major schools of international relations are the realist school, and that's like the John Mearsheimers. You've got the constructivist schools, and I'm not super familiar with them as well. But then you have like the liberal schools, and that's the sort of uh, neoliberal capitalist sort of American global empire school of thought, right? Where we just need to, if we can just give them our values and open up the markets and open them up to democracy, then everything will be like 1776 all over the world.
Right.
It's really it's like neoconservatism, but with a pride flag.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. No, that's certainly like an evolution from the basic principles behind the 2003 invasion. There's
and
this
and and
problematic dictatorship that's extremely weak. We need to test out the idea that we can implement policy,
and to
our
do a
policy, military.
to do a Trumpian weave, right? That's the real truth of Iraq, right? The
Right.
lesson that we didn't learn as we kind of fund Ukraine. The lesson we learned is, oh, we can't just uh, our military isn't good enough to win, so we should just fund so that other militaries lose.
Right.
We should be the funders rather than the boots on the ground,
Right.
which is
Which,
pretty perverse.
yeah, it's almost worse because we don't have,
Skin in the
God,
game, yeah.
yeah, God forbid we would ever send American men to die in Ukraine. But yeah, we don't have skin in the game, so we're just, you get people like Lindsey Graham saying like, "Oh, every dollar spent that kills a Russian is a
Well, I
dollar well
mean, but no, he's more concerned about our greatest ally than
spent." Sure.
that guy.
Yeah,
Anyway,
he's
all that is to say is that the real story of Iraq, right, which this book is apolitical, more or less. There are a couple
definitely.
of I would say that it's also just kind of a time capsule in its politics, right? There are allusions and references to the culture at the time. There's and anybody who's anti-war is also like pro-abortion, John Stewart viewers,
Mhm.
and everybody who's for the war is in love with George W. Bush, right?
Yeah.
So it's just this time capsule. It doesn't reflect our political reality. It didn't really reflect the political reality of 2014, to its credit.
Yeah,
It's
definitely. That's
hermetically sealed in that war from 2003 to 2010.
Yeah, which is I think I was kind of excited to read it because I wanted to see if this is foolish in hindsight, if it would see if it would shed some, if it had anything to say about like the bigger picture. Um it doesn't.
Unfortunately, it doesn't,
It
and,
really
and
doesn't. It's
that's not the goal of the book. I'm not going to hold
exactly.
that against Cly.
Oh yeah, me either.
I don't think it would have won the awards that it did, or gotten the notoriety that it did if it did go there.
Right. And who knows what.
I would say Finley is a little bit more introspective when it comes to that question.
Yes,
Uh,
definitely
and,
interrogates his role in the bigger picture, which
and
he's extremely cynical about.
and to reweave, we're doing weaves on weaves. We're Donald Trumping that.
Right. I
Uh,
just listened to that today.
oh, he's that was so entertaining. I listened to it on a plane. Um, anyway, uh, the neoliberal order, right? That said, or let's say that just the liberal world order, right? The American empire, whether it's neoliberal, whether it's neoconservative, just the empire as it exists that says we can do all these things and everything will be fine. Didn't read Samuel Huntington, who wrote Clash of Civilizations, I think in like the the 90s, maybe the 80s. where he predicts that after it must have been, sorry, excuse me, it must have been post-Soviet Union, because he's talking about cultures. The clash of civilizations are that you have all of these different cultures that are unique around the world and that might not buy into Western democracy, right?
Certainly.
So as the empire grows, and it has grown, the conflicts are going to be these civilizational struggles, of epic proportions in some way, like small fights, but with grand sort of consequences, because these people are just not us,
Yeah,
and we are not them.
of course. And I mean, interestingly,
And he was
like
called
for
all sorts of things, and he's been vindicated, I think, since Iraq. But he was kind of pilloried for a while for saying some pretty mild mannered things.
yeah, I think it's just it Pat Buchanan in the I think the intro to Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War
Mm.
talks about what he sees as like a Churchill complex in the
Mhm.
American foreign policy uh, blob, and that it applies equally to George. I just read a book called America's War for the Greater Middle East by Andrew Basevich, which is pretty good. It's decent. Like it's hard to get a straight history when
Well,
we're so
and
close to
and
the
tell everybody
conflict.
why you're so interested in this. Give us a taste of your next project.
Well, I'm working on a book that has probably a third of it or less set in Iraq. It's mostly set in Montana, but some of it's gonna be set in Iraq. It's kind of it's a story about another story about a young man who um, is a it's a pretty normal dude, but he ends up. Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything.
That's fine. But
It's
there's a purpose. I guess I was just trying to say that there's a purpose to all this reading that you've been doing, besides entertainment or knowledge or understanding, that you've got
totally
you've got work on the horizon, that
right,
people
and
should get excited for.
I'm trying to I'm trying to understand, like, it was ongoing throughout my childhood, and I had to um I'm I'm pretty I don't know, I'm not like young anymore. I'm 27. So I was growing up in the middle of the Global War on Terror, and it was really close to me because my dad was in it in in a specific capacity, and I grew up on military bases, and yeah, so it was like that was kind of the culture that I was a part of. So I'm interested in sort of interrogating like an aspect of my youth that I was like way too young to understand. I just knew that my dad was part of a giant organization that was fighting wars. Um, and then I also sort of want to try and understand it from my father's perspective and solve that problem. I'm really interested in the dynamic between fathers and sons. So that's the I just had a kid myself too. So this is all. Uh,
Congratulations.
thank you. This is all like it's all woven together. This is how I guess interrogate personal problems. I write a book about it. So I'm writing a book about a guy that's I guess in present day would be in his 40s, but I'm trying to understand it from that perspective. And redeployment was really helpful in getting that boots on the ground perspective, which is going to be it's kind of the centerpiece of the forthcoming novel. Um, and I'm
It's
interested in the strategic aspect, like the really big picture thing,
mm,
just to see if I can say something unique or different about the not different. I don't know. You want to be incisive as a writer. You don't want to just say things that everybody's already heard about Iraq. I'm really cautious. You see things online are like, oh, it's about oil, or oh, it was just we're fighting
it-
for our greatest ally. We're fighting, and those are partially true, but like the whole picture is so much more bizarre. And I definitely think Iraq specifically is probably like the most emblematic American conflict of. I don't know. It's probably more emblematic of America's ultimate destiny and certain of its inherent attributes than even like Vietnam was.
In certain ways, it's like the America War.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, you've got the green zone, right, which is this almost like a Disneyland in the middle of Iraq,
Right.
and you can go shopping, you can buy a Rolex,
Right, and
you
then there's
can.
the proliferation of contractors. Because it was a volunteer conflict, and we didn't have like the personnel to manage, you know, things from like security on roads, which is kind of crazy. Certain roads, the green zone's heavily involved with that whole thing, and then also like even to things like staffing, like the DFAC in theater.
Mhm.
Um,
Or making sure that the McDonald's is manned.
right, yeah, like the airdropped Burger Kings, dude. Yeah, there's so many like fascinating aspects of the war. I mean, it's I hate to use the word because I don't necessarily mean it in a positive light, but it's quite iconic. I mean,
Yeah, no, no,
probably in a similar way, older generations would have thought Vietnam was iconic, but
I think iconic is a good word.
right,
But Vietnam was so much more serious. It was taken more seriously.
right. I
Like
remember listening to this episode that Jocko was doing with I think it was Daryl Cooper. To be honest, they have a really good series.
they have their own little thing that they haven't picked up in a while, but when they do come together, it's pretty good listen.
Yeah, well, the first 7 episodes of that show are just about, they're just about Iraq and Jocko's experience in Ramadi specifically, and he talks about how American culture, like, at the time of that was so it was, like, inherently, obsessed with violence, kind of, like,
Mhm.
it's like these guys are, like, coming back from patrols, and they're listening to, Bodies by a Drowning Pool, and, like, they're playing Halo in the barracks and things like that, and, you know
And then you have these assholes who just call themselves like the Punishers, and they use like
Right.
the Marvel comic character, and now everybody does that. Like you can't see a lifted pickup truck in America that doesn't have the Punisher logo on
Right.
it. Like
Yeah, going back to American Sniper, that there's I think a scene where they like
well,
show
I
that
think
the
that
first
was
time someone spray painted that stencil, it's supposed to be like this
right,
iconic
and
moment.
they're like a revenge squad because one of their guys gets killed.
Right.
Uh, and I think Jocko Willink was the commanding officer of that team.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was. Yeah,
Yeah,
Team Bruiser or something.
yeah. So just you know,
It's fascinating.
I don't know.
If
I've got
anybody's
mixed feelings, and I'm not gonna sit here and judge men for what they had to do in combat. I was a rear echelon guy. I really don't have any standing, but from men that have been there and know what happened, uh, you know, I I I can't call guys like Chris Kyle like a hero, or
right.
Marcus Luttrell, who apparently, if the rumor is to be believed, the reason that all his buddies got killed is because he turned tail and ran.
Right, that's I've heard that as well. I just yeah, there's so many different allegedly there's video of that event. I haven't personally seen it, but yeah,
Probably, I think it was like Predator drone footage.
right. That's it's shocking stuff.
Yeah.
But I would recommend to anyone that's interested in this period of the Iraq War, which is definitely the most kinetic, most interesting. If you want a good primary source, listen to the first I think it's 7 episodes of the Unraveling podcast. It's extremely helpful for understanding like a bunch of different aspects of the conflict.
So right up until we got Saddam, right? Because it wasn't, we got into Iraq, and then I think we got him in like late 2003, early 2004, right?
Right. I think
Uh,
that's right. Yeah.
yeah.
It was a while, relatively speaking.
But yeah, in the grand scheme of the war, it wasn't.
Mhm.
Like we got him pretty early, and then we were stuck with like a big pile of shit. Uh,
Right.
but up until we got him, we got him.
Mhm.
Mission accomplished. You had Hollywood kind of stay silent, And as soon as the orders were given out, you had all these movies come out around the same time in like the early like the late 2000s up until 2008 when Obama gets in, right? All these anti-war movies. Robert Redford had a few. Um, Kevin Bacon was in one, and it's all like this. It's all pushing that narrative of, oh, this tragedy. We're losing all of these boys and a few girls too, uh, needlessly, just for oil, right? Uh,
Right.
and then
So
something,
silly.
and then as soon as Obama gets elected, all those go away, and then suddenly it's just about, well, I mean, these look the elite soldiers, the tier one operators, look how great and brave and amazing and awesome they are, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
which is it's really I didn't think about it, but that's like yeah, American Sniper starts production probably right at the beginning of Obama's second term, which is really ironic because so many liberals like hated that movie, but it's also can't be a coincidence it came out then, especially because Obama was, from what I understand, like giving those guys during Obama's term were running in people's houses at a very high tempo.
mhm. But I'm more because I enlisted mid Obama,
Mm,
let's say, but I was seriously considering joining during Bush. I
mm.
wasn't quite old enough yet. But I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So watching these movies, and my hyper lib mom watched these movies, just scared out of her mind the whole time, you know,
Right.
and like she, anyway, all of that is to say is that propaganda is a bitch.
Right. And the oil thing, there's a really
I
I
wish we
couldn't
took the
remember.
oil.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't really like point you to the exact Twitter thread, but there's a funny argument a couple months ago, maybe like a year ago, between Will Stancil, funnily enough, that
Oh
guy,
God.
and but even funnier, it was between him and this Democratic socialist who he runs a podcast called Blowback, if you've heard of it.
I've not heard of it, but that sounds interesting. That's one of those things. Like, have you read Dave McGowan's Program to Kill?
No, I haven't yet. I've heard a
Oh,
lot
that
of
that
good things
that's
about it.
the yeah. It's like the parapolitics Bible, right?
Right, right.
And like a lot of conspiracy people cite that as like their big red pill. But he was a classic lefty, you know.
Interesting.
And a lot of these books were written by lefties, but they come to, let's say people in our side of things take a lot away from them in spite of the politics, right? Because there's just good info in there, and there's whatever you want to say, the horseshoe effect or whatever, or that we can learn from these things. So hearing a podcast called Blowback, that kind of perks my ears up, where I'm like, oh, there's probably some good stuff there.
The good stuff is mainly the production values.
Oh, really?
I I tried to listen to it. There's just like a certain tone and a certain glibness to all of these things, which I understand. It's good to like they're informative. There's a lot of facts, but it's ultimately going in this direction where, and this is why the argument happened on Twitter, which is really funny, because the democratic socialist point of view on the Iraq wars is just straightforward imperialism. And the argument happened because the guy that runs this podcast was like, uh, it's pretty clear that the Iraq war was in American interests. And, and Will Stancil is like, actually, it's pretty clear that it wasn't. We didn't gain anything from it. And this caused like an insane intra-leftist fight where they're like, well, if you say we gain nothing from it, then like that means like the oil narrative like doesn't work. And that like threatens my whole like huge podcast and my whole understanding of how imperialism works in the 21st century, which is obviously flawed. It's not. I mean,
Yeah, when you think about it, it's like, yeah, you're both wrong. Like,
I know, that's why it's so funny.
so you've got the oil narrative, which is wrong, right? Then you have the Stancil narrative, which is the neoliberal narrative, which
Yeah,
is
which
that
was it was
that sort
unsuccessful
of
because we didn't implement a Western style democracy there. Therefore, it
right,
wasn't in
like
American interests, which
right.
it wasn't. But you know, yeah,
It wasn't in American interest for a whole host of reasons, you know.
yeah, and yeah, the oil thing. Like, I mean, we probably should have just invaded Kuwait if we wanted oil. You know, back in 1991, we should have like if that was the problem. And also, I
I mean,
think
we're sitting on more oil than the Middle East, like
yeah,
all the Middle
exactly.
East combined.
Yeah, that's the other point, especially after fracking. I'm pretty sure America's proven
We
reserves
are
have
we are
almost
we are
doubled.
my goodness. When I think about like just how materially wealthy this nation is, when I think about just how diverse the climates are, I'm like my friend Paul Fahrenheit, who you might have uh, met a couple times,
Yes,
uh, great dude,
I'm aware of
good
them.
follow. He's convinced that like America's this providential nation, and he's not. That's not an original take to him. He's just the first guy I think of when I think of this,
Hmm.
and I'm like, yeah, God really does have a special place in his heart for the United States.
Yeah, there's the Bismarck quote, which is like God has a special providence for fools, drunkards in the United States of America, or something.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to use
no,
that. That's
it's totally true. So,
yeah.
and given that, you have to like, yeah, given
Like,
that
how do we keep
circumstance, you have to
fucking it
think,
up?
okay, well, yeah, how do we keep fucking it up? And then also, what was the point of committing all that treasure? And yeah, it's like the contractors did get wealthy, but it wasn't from resource extraction. It was from the United States
It
like
was just printing
cannibalizing
money.
itself
Yeah.
to sustain this conflict. It was like a little bit of the tail wags the dog going on,
Right.
which is that's sort of a constant in the federal government. It seems like after World War II, at the very
Yeah.
least.
The Roman Empire got rich by taking home the spoils of the conquered. You know,
Right.
uh, the Greeks. Athens found silver mines, but the Athens specifically got wealthy or wealthier because they built up the greatest navy in the Mediterranean, and then uh, they acted as hegemon, and all the other city states had to pay for the privilege of being protected by the Athenians, right? And that
Yeah,
uh,
we don't even make countries pay tribute to us.
exactly, and yeah, we pay for the privilege of protecting global trade.
Right. I'm sure there's some like big, some like macro finance guy would be like, actually,
Yeah, yeah.
the way
Well,
foreign reserves work, they do pay, but
well, yeah.
I would
So
like it
if
explicitly
if
earmarked
you look
as,
at Bretton Woods, right, post World War II, or yeah, was Bretton Woods post World War II? I think it was.
I believe
Uh,
so.
yeah, because I think
Actually, the first Bretton Woods, I'm pretty sure was before.
uh,
Let me check.
yeah, feel and dear listener, feel free to fact check me on anything that I've said.
No,
I
it
love
was it was 1944.
I thought so. I thought it was
Yeah.
towards the end. It was the basically the terms of peace among the allies, more or
Hmm.
less. And it's the first. It's the bulwark against communism, right? And later on, you get like turbo Bretton Woods with the Marshall Plan, right?
Right.
And it's the peace imposed upon the victors, which
Hmm.
is kind of perverse, right? But it
Certainly.
really did show America as like the big dog, and that makes sense, right? That you're going to buy American products. We are going to keep this massive manufacturing thing, and you see that not only did the quote unquote world get better, right? The free world or whatever, but materially America flourished when it acted in the interest of Americans as the world hegemon.
Certainly, and within the rules of the wonky fiat Well, actually, I don't think it was fiat at that point, but within the globally acceptable rules of international finance, Americans were still provided for, which is considerably different to today, I would say, where it seems international finance comes first.
Right. And that's the difference between, let's say, the nation and the empire, is that yeah, Iraq was a success for international finance, right? It was a success for globalism, even if it was a massive failure for the globalist project, but it got everybody in the globalist project sort of on the same page. Uh, you had Obama, who ran as a repudiation to Iraq specifically, but just the Bush uh, White House more broadly.
Right.
And 2 years in, he quote unquote ends Iraq just to double down on Afghanistan. Right? It's like, okay, we've kind of we've used up this girl. Let's keep our let's promote our side piece, who we've kind of kept in the dark for a while. That's a very crude analogy, but that whole era is a pretty crude time, so I feel it appropriate.
Right. And then what happens in Obama's term to Iraq around 2011? Well, first of all, the Arab Spring happens. That's the big thing, which
Right?
is
A
really
video,
interesting.
a quote unquote anti-Muslim video caused a terrorist attack to occur, which is such bullshit. I can't and people do that crap.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's really interesting. And then Bradley Manning being involved and simultaneously being like this crazy like infosec breaching criminal, but also like a martyr for
for free speech
yeah.
and like
Which is, I mean, maybe that explains the ends there. Like you hit two birds with one stone. You give a reason to support support the expansion of the global war on terror expand the theater throughout the Middle East, and then also have stay on top of the civil rights battle as well. Yeah, but yeah, and then ISIS obviously in 2011, 2012, just exploding through Iraq. And some of the biggest urban battles, I want to say, since like World War II, being fought in Iraq between ISIS and the military that we trained and equipped. So yeah, it's really it's
best army money can buy.
right. Well, apparently they did do quite well.
The and that's the thing too, is
Towards
that
the end.
Iraq was the sexier war because Saddam had trained up such a good military, quote unquote good, right? Good for the region, right? It was pretty dilapidated. It was pretty messed up after the first Gulf War. It performed well against Iran in the Iran-Iraq war before that. Uh, it was kind of a shell of itself in
Yeah,
2003, but we were able, the basis to be able to train a competent force was there, where that just didn't exist in Afghanistan.
certainly. Yeah, Afghanistan was
Whole other thing, yeah. But
completely different.
but to kind of weave back to redeployment, we talked about Saddam Hussein. There's a pretty funny story of it's called psychological warfare, or no, what was it called?
Psychological operations.
Psyops, yeah. Um, where an Iraqi, like an Arab kid joins the army, and his dad is like hyper American. He's so patriotic. He looks just like Saddam Hussein, but
Right.
he's one of ours, and he's like anti-Saddam this and anti-Saddam that, and he's so proud of his son for going. And uh, being Arab, being able to speak the language, he creates a bunch of pamphlets, and he like tries to demoralize the insurgents in the Iraqi army. and he ends up telling his dad what he did, and his father has this really interesting reaction
Right.
where it's clear it's and I don't think that Clyde meant to do this, right? But it's clear that there's this deep loyalty that the father has to Iraq and to Arabs in general, that his son's actions deeply hurt him because it's almost like a dishonorable way of fighting a war,
Well,
like
yeah.
questioning manhood, doing all these things, just to get a rise out of these guys so that they can be killed.
Yeah, and it's also told through the narrative frame of him trying to like explain himself to uh this girl he basically has a crush on in one of his college classes. Um
Right,
yeah, he
right, right,
has
right.
some he what I can't remember, they have some kind of it goes to like the dean of students, their disagreement, and he claims like she's discriminating against him because he's an Arab or something like that, which is pretty funny because he
Yeah, no,
knows it's like
he even cynically plays the game.
right, but he doesn't believe it. He just kind of wants to like show her he can do the same thing that she's throwing
He
at
can
him,
he can
and
play the card if he has to,
right,
uh,
and then he
which is
gets her.
so damn true.
It's
Like,
yeah, it's hilarious. But yeah, he gets her to his apartment. They like sit down. They smoke hookah, or he smokes hookah at least. I can't remember if she does. And then she just kind of like sits mute while he like unloads his horrible war story on her. And yeah, I think the dad has this romantic idea of war, which his son destroys by yeah explaining like to get this guy
out of
this
the house,
this
yeah,
leader that yeah to get him out of the house they basically are on loudspeakers talking in graphic detail about how the Marines are like raping his daughters and his wife just because the Marines had been able to separate them somehow, and so they're playing on that uncertainty on this terrorist, um, and
and
just
it's a lot easier if he just comes out than they have to possibly risk their lives by going in to get him.
certainly. And yeah, you can tell like when he's describing it, like it's so obscene what they were saying. It's like almost a form of self-harm for him to like repeat it, and he just wants his dad and the girl to like basically witness him for that, because otherwise he does, or maybe to confess it, like he doesn't know how to get people to understand. It's kind of a similar theme as to Prayer in the Furnace, where it
Mhm.
feels like no one can possibly get what he's going through, but he's like willing to, or what he had gone through, but he's willing to like try.
And I'm glad you brought up prayer in the furnace again, because there was something that I forgot to mention, especially early Iraq, right? You had the Jerry Falwells talking about how this war was going to bring about Armageddon, how the end times were near, and we were on a holy crusade, a Christian crusade, right?
Hmm.
And it did so much damage to one. It completely made the um, Christian right, the evangelicals as a voting bloc, completely irrelevant, right? They
Hmm.
haven't had any sort of say in American politics in since, right?
Right.
They lost all their credibility there, and it also created a whole generation, like the millennial generation, and like I guess late Gen X, like the people who fought in Iraq
Sure.
became atheists, or either were atheists before this, or certainly were atheists after, or at least agnostics, right?
Yeah. No, I've
And
heard that from people.
because you know they were sold, especially I had friends who went to Liberty University, which is Jerry Falwell's college, and it's like this evangelical college, right? Actually, I think it was John Slaughter who talked about this, who's another great guy, great follow that you should uh all read and get his takes on things. He's a real veteran. Thank him for his service. Make sure you do that. He's gonna be pissed. Um, but no, all that is to say is, or maybe it was George Bagby. It's some really smart guy that way smarter than me talked about this, that the evangelical right really sold Iraq hard, so that when Iraq, and like when the narrative fell apart, so did the evangelical right. And I think we're seeing the ascendancy of two very different types of Christianity in the United States right now. We're seeing the sort of watered down, non-denominational sphere really ascendant. At least, in personal experience, I've seen this, where it's really like quote unquote trying to get back to basics,
Hmm.
just biblically centered most of the time. Otherwise, it's just like, we're just trying to love Jesus like he loves us, kind of stuff.
Right.
And you also have the traditional apostolic churches that are growing. The Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and even some Lutheran denominations are really well. And I don't mean to say that the Lutherans are apostolic, or rather the Anglicans as well are ascendant as well. And again, I don't want to get too deep into that hornet's nest. I don't have any Christian enemies.
Oh, you just said Lutherans are apostolic.
Sue
It's
me.
over. No, I'm just kidding.
You know
I,
what
I
I'm.
think they might actually be apostolic, technically, because Martin Luther was a Catholic priest, I think. I don't know. I'm not equipped to go into that
Yeah,
morass.
neither am I. All that is to say is the horseshoe of very little to no tradition to highly traditional people, and the churches in the middle are dying, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's pretty well reflected. It makes me think of a specific guy at my church who I know. He served in Afghanistan, and I know he converted from being an atheist.
Hmm.
I'm not certain the extent to which the service in war like made him an atheist, but it probably was no small impact. Um,
Well, it'd be one thing if it was everything that it was sold to be. If it was a holy crusade, if we weren't murdering Christians or getting Christians murdered,
right,
you know, if if we were there for the right reasons and we didn't support uh, at least in Afghanistan, we didn't support the rape of young boys
certainly,
with and you can't say anything about it because they're quote unquote not Taliban, and as soon as the Taliban come back in, those guys are hung from lampposts and murdered themselves,
right,
and a morality instead of no morality is enforced. Whether or not the Taliban's morality is uh, moral, I guess. Like it's a system. You know what I mean?
right,
Rather than what we have, which is this sort of amoral uh, thing. Let them figure it out for themselves, type deal.
right. What is interesting is that Al Qaeda, like in their propaganda materials, they referred to the coalition forces as crusaders.
Right, and the Great Satan at the same time.
Right. Which that maybe there was a crusade, but it was for the
An anti-crusade type deal.
yeah, an anti-crusade. Yeah, as an anti-crusade for the benefit of uh contractors and
Yeah, for Raytheon and Pride
Halliburton.
parades and
Yeah,
uh,
Raytheon and Pride Parades and Halliburton, and not for the American people.
yeah, maybe that's what Iraq was, because you're trying to find the quote unquote thesis statement for the war. Let's say I think that's
Mhm.
what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to figure out what it all was about, and
Right. There's still something missing though. Like that.
it's so deeply unserious that it's just a facsimile of a war.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's possible. Like all of this belies the fact that the people were still having, horrible. I mean, like Fallujah, for example, or Baghdad, were both. I mean, that was like hell on earth.
Right, right. Fallujah was like one of the worst places on earth, definitely.
Yeah. So there's this aspect of like bureaucrats in the foreign policy blob that just want prestige. They want to be responsible for the downfall of the next Hitler and say that, oh, at least I wasn't Neville Chamberlain appeasing him. You got idiots like that, and then you got idiots like Paul Bremer, I believe that was his name, who was trying to run the provisional government and failing miserably. Trying to turn Iraq into something it could never be because of this cultural problem you're talking about. Then you also got Halliburton, milking the government from all directions. You've got private military contractors doing the same thing, but also, like taking serious like casualties at the same time. But then the theater for this war is like the cradle of civilization as well. It's like home to cities that are like said to be founded by giants in the Old Testament, and it's this really forbidding landscape that's
Oh yeah, I mean
so
they
hot
like
apparently that yeah, go
Abraham
ahead.
is from that area, like the
Yeah,
Abraham when he was just Abram. Like it's really weird to think about.
yeah, like Baghdad is I don't know, I want to say like 20 miles from archaeological ruins people believe, or that were the site of Babylon. There's those really great pictures of American soldiers at the ziggurat. And then there's also a really cool photo of these guys outside the Ishtar Gate, which I believe it's probably I think it's a recreation. But it was a gate that was outside of Mosul, which is it's a historical site of Nineveh, the ancient city of Nineveh,
Hmm.
which has been more or less continuously inhabited for that general region, at least, for tens of thousands of years. It's spoken about as one of the oldest cities um, in the world. It's really good. Yeah, like Nimrod founded it, and it's just crazy.
I mean,
So
that's where Noah was told to go and uh,
Jonah,
Jonah. Thank you. Yes, Jonah was told to go and preach to, or and God would smite them if they didn't convert, and he didn't want them to convert, so he runs away. He
yeah,
wanted God to smite them, which
and
is
the funniest part is he comes back after being in the whale, and then he doesn't even like he tells them to repent, and he goes and sits on the mountain and waits for them to get obliterated, and but they
he tries
actually
to get a
repented.
even even the cows repent
Right.
of their sins, and Nineveh is spared.
It does eventually get destroyed though,
Yeah.
which is sort of sad. But yeah, Nineveh's I don't know. All it to me, I mean, I'm just a guy in America. I never went over there. I grew up during this war. Um, to me, it has this mystical quality to it that I guess is sort of based in world literature. It's also sort of just a vibes based determination. I just think it's really interesting that there's men that are 19 years old running around in the cradle of civilization, places where Old Testament giants used to roam, listening to let the bodies hit the floor before going into someone's house. You know,
and then and then at the end of it, when all the bombs have finished dropping, a public relations officer tries to teach them how to play baseball
yes,
because a donor thinks that baseball is the key.
right.
That was wild. That's a great story.
Yeah, I like how granular it got.
That's my favorite story of the collection.
Right. Yeah, it was just like they really have to please this like one dude, so they managed to get them
To
to
at
what
least
is
pose for a photo
right.
with all the baseball crap, and they try and teach them baseball, and they're just, what the hell is this?
Yeah, in the meantime, the main character of that story is super pissed off because they actually managed to set up like a functioning women's clinic, but the problem is it's like a money sink, and they want them to not focus. They want them to focus on women's issues, but they would prefer if women were starting businesses,
Right.
which is
Oh
just
yeah.
super
Wait.
silly.
And yeah, if that's not that's like the most prolific or prophetic story of the whole book, right?
Yes.
Because that just gets turned up to like an 11, and then that crap comes over here.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it would have won the National Book Award if he wrote that in 2018 and had a story like that in there. I think
Fair.
2014 was just early enough for
Yeah,
that.
it was really just the end of an era and the beginning of another. There's another war book, uh, my favorite book on Vietnam called Matterhorn by Karl Marlantes. He also wrote a nonfiction book called What It's Like to Go to War, which I think I recommended you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, you recommended both, I think.
yes, Matterhorn
Yeah, I've
is
heard of Matterhorn.
such a good book, and I'm trying to get John Slaughter to read it so that we can discuss it because I think he'd really enjoy it and have a lot of things to say about it. All that is to say, there's a subplot of the book. I think it's either this one or it's got to be this one, where one of the characters meets like the CIA spook, right? And he
Mhm.
talks about how the key to winning in Vietnam is rice. It's either this book or it's Fields of Fire by James Webb. They're both about Marines in Vietnam.
Hmm.
Though Marlantes' book is a lot better in my opinion. Uh, that also won the National Book Award in like 2001 or something.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a fantastic read. The guy's like a Rhodes Scholar, for whatever that's worth. Really smart dude, very insightful. But the CIA spook talks about how once you get the crop yields up, then capitalism can flourish in Vietnam and communism is going to be defeated. So they have basically this GMO rice that can grow anywhere, right? That they're testing in the Philippines, I think, or something, right?
Mhm.
And it's a complete disaster when it gets to Vietnam, but it doesn't matter because, like, they're just gonna throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks. No failure is not accounted for because they're only looking at the wins,
Right.
so that when these things do fall apart, no one knows why.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. There's another Vietnam War National Book Award winner. What 2007 called Tree of Smoke. Have you heard of that one?
Oh yeah, Dennis Johnson.
Yep. I read that this year before I read Redeployment. Actually, I don't know that Tree of Smoke stuck with me as much. I was kind of expecting a lot more out
Dennis
of it.
Johnson's a little weird. He's great. I recommend him. He's a little. Actually, I think you should read Jesus' Son.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
That's the one I keep hearing about from him.
yeah, Tree of Smoke was. I like Dennis Johnson, but he can be a little disjointing.
Yeah, it's a really I almost I like how cerebral it is, but it's just kind of boring, I guess. That's the worst
Yeah,
thing you can say
yeah,
about
yeah.
it. It is a cool premise though, where you have the unofficially incorporated the guy who's so esteemed by the intelligence state that he basically is allowed to do whatever he wants until he tries to implement a double agent, and then the CIA is like scrambling to discredit him within the agency, and then eventually like get him killed somehow. And then his nephew, who's just caught in the middle of all of it. There's a lot of interesting ideas about what it means to wage counterinsurgency
Hmm.
in that book. I don't know if his I'd read a book like this mainly for research, see if he's done anything that I would like to do or
And he's a craft guy too. You can take a lot
definitely
from him as just from the technical aspects of writing, and also just he has such a unique voice.
totally
R.I.P. Dennis Johnson. Don't do
right.
drugs, kids.
Right.
Uh, I mean that's all I've got, man. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like we kind of glossed over?
um no, I don't think so. I still don't think it's going to be I think it's going to be probably when we're older that the definitive global war on terror monograph will be written, and access to archives is allowed, and some prodigious magisterial scholar will put that together and everything will be laid bare. But
Yeah,
that's kind of what it takes. We're still really close to this conflict, even though it almost doesn't feel like it because America has changed so much.
Yeah. If you read like the Stephen Cole books, Directorate S and Ghost Wars, which are about the intelligence around these conflicts, they just they seem unreal.
Right.
I mean, hell, we don't even know about like first Afghanistan. Like we still like with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and now all that went into that.
Right.
And we still don't truly understand Vietnam. I don't think. Hell, we're re-examining World War II at the moment. We're in a moment where World War II can be examined from I don't want to say objective, because there is no objectivity with history.
Right.
But we can examine it from enough distance where certain narratives are not like the post World War II consensus has been the bedrock of Western civilization for 60, 80 years, right?
Certainly.
And now we're starting to, that bedrock has eroded to the point that people are saying, well, maybe everything that we've been told and believed isn't necessarily beneficial to us anymore.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I don't even want to say true or false, because that's like, again, narratives aren't true or false. They're useful or not useful.
Right. Yeah. It's a postmodern way of looking at things, but that's kind of that's the world we live
I
in
mean, we're in a
today.
postmodern world. We're
Yeah,
not going to be.
exactly.
I don't think we're going to be able to put that back. And I think,
No, it's
uh,
totally true. I think
and
revisionist is a really good word to use for
mhm,
the history telling that's going on now.
definitely. And in
It's
fact, people
sorry,
talk
go ahead.
about what postmodern Christianity kind of looks like, and not to shill for any denomination, because again, that's not really the purpose of this podcast. But I do think that the tradition and the depth of thought around orthodoxy, and just the orthodox mind, to borrow the term, uh, can weather questioning like the postmodern questioning of all narratives better than the enlightenment tinged denominations of the West.
Exactly. Like if you look at you know, narratives, which narratives survive? Like which narratives are 2,000 years old that are still people still believe and weather storms in their personal lives with. It's not the story of, well, it's not necessarily like MLK, like that people are using to get through their day-to-day lives. It's the story of Jesus Christ. Story of the Gospels. It's the stories of the Old Testament. It's the immortal archetypes. So yeah, I totally agree with that. It the idea that certain things that can be fit for certain narratives can be fit for all crises kind of breaks the postmodern gridlock,
Mhm.
which is really helpful.
And I did, my I'm long on Christianity, right? To borrow like the stock market phrase,
Right.
I'm bullish on Christianity in the long term and the short term. But for all you counting at home, you can check off Hudson goes into Christianity, where you didn't think that he would bring that up on the bingo card. Uh, anyway, John, uh, I wanted to give you another moment to talk about Fedbook, and your whatever else you got going on. Tell the people how they can support you, where they can find you, and just a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, Fedbook was my first novel. It was self-published. I've heard a lot of good things about it. Um I think it's quite good. A lot of other people think it's quite good. So if you feel like supporting me, you should buy it. And you can
We'll
find
have a
it.
link to that below.
Yeah, and it's if you don't click the link, it's easy to spell. Um, I also have a Substack. It's called Nineveh 20XX, where you can go to John J Stancliff at Substack or .substack.com. Which I would encourage people that like Fedbook to do. I have some. That's pretty much where I post all my short fiction. There's quite an extensive archive there. Um, and yeah, I don't think I have too much else to share. You know, I have a Twitter account, but that's whatever. It's just to sell books.
No, I know you're not as. I've found that Twitter writers are either really good at posting or really good at writing,
Right.
and I'm a great poster.
Yeah, I'm a pretty mid poster. I mean, I post some funny stuff, I guess.
You've got
You know, you just had to like make jokes on Twitter, and I don't know. I have a sense of humor, but it's kind of exhausting coming up with jokes all the time.
yeah. It's almost its own sort of genre of writing, except
Which
Dan
I'm
Baldrick.
also
He
sort of
can do both.
bullish on. I feel like Twitter, like being able to come up with witty aphorisms like one after the other, that takes skill. I'm definitely a bit resentful that I don't have that skill, but at least my long books are good.
I co-sign that 100%, John. You're a good writer, and people should definitely check out your book if they haven't. As for me, you know all about the Double Dealer at this point if you've been listening to this podcast at all. So thank you for making it to the end. If you like the Double Dealer, what we're doing, go ahead, buy a magazine, become a paid subscriber, and get your own episode of Canon Fodder. You can buy my books. I have them on Amazon, Automaton and The Perfect and the Wicked. I've got some more work coming out. If you enjoy my stuff, I've got a Substack, all that yada yada yada. You don't need to know about me. This is more about John, honestly, this episode. And I don't know how to end podcasts, so I will say insert ending here.